All right. We are, looks like we're ready to go. We are, lesson 10. There you go, Mark. There you go. Everybody's excited about the Slido code.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Slido
Gotta
ready.
do the Slido. Thanks for being here. I know it's kind of chilly. It's holidays, and I don't know if it's, I know at Duane School, the flu and everything else is going through, so wash your hands, please. It's that time of year, isn't it?
It is that.
So we're going to get started with a word of prayer, and I was going to have Joe lead us in prayer, but he's really struggling with the Slido.
Yeah. Have your son lead it.
It wanted $7? Oh, I turned on that option to $6. I needed some more Christmas money. Joe, if you'll lead us in prayer. Yeah.
Gracious Father, thank you so much for this time to get together in midweek and take a look at your word, Father, and understand how we can speak with each other in such a way that we might honor you and might glorify you. And Father, help us as we walk along and look for opportunities to serve others and to share your gospel. Father, help us tonight, knowing that we've got those among us who are sick and concerned, and just be with everyone who is who's looking for healing. Father, we know that your will is perfect and your will is amazing, and Father, we want to completely have faith in who you are as a Father and as our God. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen.
All right, first question. How many people are involved in dialogue? This was one of your questions, so
It's a Slido.
should be quick. Should be quick. Hopefully it won't ask you for $7.
Now, let me ask you a question before we start this.
Okay.
My mom's not here,
Yeah.
but one of her famous things is she talks to herself all the time. And she does answer herself.
She does answer.
Yeah, so is that considered a dialogue? She does.
I think for the sake of
I heard him, the voices in his head. Okay.
I'm going to leave that question alone and defer to Pastor Smith to answer that. A wise teacher. Okay, I got to know who broke the word down with the prefix word "die" means to. Who?
Let's see, who's in the room?
Of course.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever.
I don't think that's true.
Dioxide is two molecules. Di, two.
Bi means to.
Dialogue, di, di.
Yeah, the other teacher's back here shaking her head, yes.
Which teacher is that? Oh, Miss K.
Miss K.
Miss K, don't validate my son, please.
I pay attention now.
Yeah. It's got to be at least two or more, but my answer would be just as many as who are involved in the situation. And I think in the spirit of Acts 15, in other words, we kind of tend to focus just in on James and Peter and Paul and Barnabas, but the elders and the sect of the Pharisees are speaking too. So we have a large amount of people. I don't know that everybody's speaking, but I know that a lot are. And so that's important. So let's get to the second question, which I think that's, here, hold up, there we go.
Oh, yeah. So, taking you back to earlier in our study, I think about lesson 2 or 3, we want to explain the bucket and the pool analogy, okay? So, Who wants to explain that?
Nobody.
I mean, I know you're dying. Explain it. The bucket in the pool analogy. You remember about that? Talking about a dialogue and a conversation. What are we talking about here?
Nobody?
Okay, go ahead. Yeah. That's right. Very good.
Okay.
Okay, so everybody's putting their bucket into the pool, right? Everybody's conversation should be a part of it. Everybody should be allowed to do that. And you know, that pool then becomes the meaning of the knowledge base of the information that's being poured in. And you know, and it should be allowed. Again, it should be an allowance that everybody can dump their bucket into the pool, right? Not just certain individuals, everyone, you know. And so it's very important because allowing that leads to a successful conversation.
Right. Yep.
All right.
Absolutely. Should, yeah, it should be somewhat fluid. The question comes up is if we're not, you know, sometimes we try to simplify everything, but I think in this area, one of the things is that we've kind of complicated the question may be, have we complicated the simple? We've not complicated the simple. I think it's more complicated than we make it. We've simplified this problem solving down, but the problem is it doesn't work quite that way. You remember the two responses we've talked about a lot that people have to these kind of conversations? Silence and violence. Right, silence and violence. So either we choose silence in a situation where we just clam up or we walk away, or maybe we say there's no sense of talking about it, or we choose violence. And what's violence? Anybody? Yelling. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in Acts 6 and 7, it gets to the point that they stoned Stephen. It's an emotional reaction based on anger, usually. And we dealt with the idea of telling ourselves stories. Here's the next slide. So this will be true or false. Last two are going to be super easy, but here you go. Communication is simple, true or false? Looks like I got 100% false so far. Oh, somebody said true.
11% true.
Always the outlier.
John, was that you? You're usually an outlier.
All right, somebody tell me why you answered the way you did. What do you mean by that, John?
Well, think of all the stuff that we've been talking about in the class, right? We're not dealing with, hey, what do you want for dinner tonight? We're talking about some very crucial conversations, and that's what makes it difficult to get past all the.
Okay. Anybody else? Who answered true? Who's bold enough to?
I mean, it's okay if you answered true.
You're allowed to have your opinion.
I did just because everybody put false. Sorry.
That's your whole life, isn't
Yeah,
it, Karen?
yeah,
That's your whole life right there.
Yeah.
Oh, Ralph's so proud. Okay.
Basically just truth.
Okay. Here's my response to this, maybe to make us think. If communication is so simple, why do we struggle so much with it? What's the number one problem in marriages, do you think?
Communication.
Almost every issue in a marriage goes back to communication. Right? Yeah. The temptation is not to listen. We don't have discipline, Eric says.
It's so simple, right? That the
Yeah.
Bible had a lot to say about it.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing how many passages are about how you talk to each other and listen to each other.
Yep.
Well, yeah, and my point is, I think if it was, I would tell you that I would answer false. And I think because, number one, if it was easy, we wouldn't need a whole quarter to talk about it if it was easy, which is what we've been doing. We wouldn't have marriages that fall apart simply because they don't know how to talk to each other. I mean, that's really the number one problem. Whether it's in-laws or sex or money or discipline your children, the real problem there is always communication, because if you could learn how to communicate, you could figure out how to work together. It's ultimately what it comes down to. I mean, there's other issues, but that's a big one.
Well, I know when I first got married, it was very simple. Communication. At least I thought so.
Yeah.
I learned.
You grew out of that?
I learned.
Yeah. Did you learn the easy way or the hard way?
Let her answer it.
Right. Yeah, when we're all on the same page
Yeah.
and have the same goals and same purpose, communication is easier. When we're not, and that's usually the problem, is my goal and purpose is me. Joe, you have a mic, by the way. Yeah.
Now, I was just reading recently about how SEAL teams operate or how special forces operate. And when they get in their diamond position or whatever position they're in, there are very few words. The words are all agreed to, and the words mean something specific. And the communication is so limited. When words are few, then errors are few. When words are many, and the Bible teaches us that we get in. But my main point really is they have to drill that. Even these one word
hours of practice. To get to that point.
Hundreds of hours of practice to get to the point where they're operating as a single unit, and it's just typically 1 or 2 word commands. It's pretty.
And hours of rehearsing a singular mission before they go. I mean, there's a lot of rehearsal involved in all of that to make that work that way. Besides speaking, what else is involved in dialogue? Listening. Francis says listening. And this is important because dialogue is not just some way to manipulate people. I think that's the important thing to keep in mind. We're not learning these things to manipulate people to get our way. We're trying to actually be objective and have a real conversation that helps us solve things. So you're next there.
All right, so if you think back to Acts 15, which has been a large topic of this class, how did listening impact the Bible story there? The biblical story that we read there in Acts 15 with how they handled everything. How did listening impact that? Yeah. Right. Yeah, so there's the great conversation here, you know, on the position of the sect of the Pharisees, and ultimately, you know, the conversation was had. We've talked about this. We've used this as a big example, and it took listening for it to move up the chain, right? In that sense, you know, to move the direction it did, and to have the result that it did. So we see how listening plays such an impactful role here. Now, the same side of this, how about listening when we're talking about Acts chapter 6 and 7, okay? In Acts chapter 6 and 7, what is our story there about? Stephen. That's right. Okay? So, what happens in this story with Stephen? Did they listen? No, I heard. Yeah. No. They didn't listen. They failed to listen to his input, and it resulted in what? A really bad decision. Okay? In fact, you know, something that we've talked about. I mean, you know, it ended in the violent situation, right? That you were talking about a while ago here. Right? Started making stuff up. That's what happens when people don't listen. Stories get told, you know, and things, you start telling yourself a story, everything started happening. We've seen this. And of course, a mob mentality almost to a degree in that situation is what took hold, really, you know. And that's how quickly, though, it can happen, too. If we're not listening, that's just the nature of people, unfortunately, at times. We have to be very careful, and we need to listen to what everything, so it doesn't end in that kind of result. So the key then is talking in this situation, going back to the bucket, right, is I need to not only urge people to dump in their bucket, but I also need to listen to what they share. Don't just ask people to dump their bucket in and then walk away. You need to listen to what they're sharing with you. Okay? They didn't listen to what Stephen was sharing. This resulted in a bad decision. Okay? And then in Proverbs 18:13, you want to look there, how does this connect to dialogue? So let's go to Proverbs 18:13. Okay? So when you look at Proverbs 18, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong thing. Proverbs 18:13. Does somebody have that?
I can read it.
Read it for me.
If one gives an answer before he hears, it is his folly and shame.
So, how does that connect to dialogue? If you're given an answer before you hear, it is a folly and a shame. We should not start what? Responding to others until what? What should we do first? Does anybody hear it? Hear them out. Yeah. Hear them out. Got to listen to them.
Parallels judging others too a little bit.
Okay. All right. We got to listen to them, right? Yeah. Did you have something, Mark? I'm sorry. Okay. Thought he had a word of wisdom there for us. So the proverb is warning us that if we ignore the counsel, there is a price to pay. Okay? All right? And that price, it's like with Stephen, really bad decisions, stupid decisions, shameful decisions. Okay? So listening is very, very impactful. Teachers say it all the time. Listen, right? Listen. I know mine did. Anyway, you
All right.
really got to.
Next, and the final slide, though. Hearing is not listening, true or false? Hearing is not listening.
Boom.
We'll know if Benny answers contrary.
Yeah.
Hearing is not listening. That's pretty quick.
Fast.
What is the difference between the two? Okay? Hearing is passive and listening is active. Yeah. Hearing and waiting on my time to speak. I mean, hearing is technically this physical process of how your body takes in sound waves and processes them into what you hear. And as long as you have the ability to hear, you're going to hear it. But listening is that action of allowing it to be processed and allowing yourself to listen. Not in a way, by the way, that, I mean, part of it is the risk, like we've been talking about, is telling yourself a story. Not that way. And I think that's one of the things to understand about Acts 6 and 7, is that's really what happens is they hear Stephen, but they interpret Stephen's words completely different. They don't listen to what Stephen's actually saying. And that's the danger of it. So in Acts 15, what we see there is it's implied that all of these people listen to each other. Because we have the Pharisees especially, they get up and they have this position about circumcision. And by the time that Peter and Paul and Barnabas and James and the elders all speak, they agree to a solution that is not the same solution they came to the table with, which means they listened. And so that's implied there in the text, that they did that in a healthy way. So that's really what we're going to try to talk about for the rest of the night. We're going to have to kind of hit some things fast to be able to finish everything, I'm afraid. But in order to listen to somebody, I've got to be prepared to listen to them tell their story. And so we're going to start off by just explaining three things that you have to be that kind of a listener that can hear their story. So first one there, Scott, is humility.
Yeah. So Philippians 2:3. Somebody else turn to 1 Peter 5:5 real quick. Be prepared to read that. Philippians 2:3 says, "Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves." So what does 1 Peter 5:5 say for us?
Young men, in the same way, submit yourselves to your elders, and all of you clothe yourselves with humility towards one another, because God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble.
Okay, so we got humility popping up in both of these verses that we've read, and so what's important here? How does humility connect here to unity? If you look at Ephesians 4, we can look at that real quick. In Ephesians 4, and 1-3. So we see humility keep popping up in these passages, but now how do we see it connect to unity? You want to read that? You have that?
Yeah. I, therefore, a prisoner for the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you've been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love, eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace.
Right. So we see humility in regards here, and we see unity being discussed in this chapter. Also in Colossians 3, 12-14, we're told to put on a heart of humility in order to have unity. Okay? So ultimately what we're seeing here is, we're being told to preserve unity by Paul, and virtues that are listed again. Part of produce unity or humility is listed first, and then we see this heart of humility in order to have unity. So what do we conclude here? What is the connection between humility and unity? Yes. Okay. Yes, sir. You have to be able to say, I'm wrong, right? Exactly. Yes.
First Peter strikes me again. It says, when he says God opposes the proud but gives grace to the humble.
Yeah. Sure.
It's like Terry spoke about in a sermon recently. We're unwilling to forgive a brother. God's unwilling to forgive us.
Yeah.
Here he's holding back grace based on our lack of humility. It seems kind of like the same outcome to me, that humility should be something that we're striving for, that and forgiveness with all of our hearts.
Right, and you think about, and I don't know if somebody else had their hand up, I think about, when Jesus is talking to Pharisees, talking to him in the prayer, right? And the Pharisees praying about how, he's glad he wasn't all these things. And then we have the sinner that goes out and prays, Father, forgive me, I am a sinner. What humility is shown there. He got past himself, right, to God. We have to do that with each other. We gotta have that humility in order for me to be able to connect in unity to my brothers and sisters, because it allows us to get past ourselves. It values others, and ultimately, it's a requirement of unity.
The whole Sermon on the Mount.
Yeah, yeah. I agree. I agree. What does it mean to be humble? What does that mean? Okay. Sure. Okay, that's good. Anything else anybody wants to add? So, being humble in itself, yes. Okay.
I know how Terry can talk on so many things that it's like just because we can do it doesn't mean we need to or
Yeah.
ought to do it. You look
Yeah, I
out
think-
for how it will benefit. So
Great. A lot of the same thing there. So, in the sense that we are sinners and we're all in need of grace, that's another way to look at it.
Yeah,
okay?
I think the key to humility is understanding that I'm just like everybody else.
Yeah.
In the area of specifically what matters is sin. Sometimes I think we look down on people because we got the gospel or whatever it is, or we think we live better than everybody else, or we think we're more spiritual. But at the end of the day, I need to remember in all these conversations, we're all the same. We're all broken people in need of grace. And regardless of what you've accomplished in life, that's the bottom line.
And it's difficult. It's not easy because we can't, we think we're pretty good. That's the pride in us, right? We got to break the pride. I have to all the time. It's very difficult in a sense until it's practiced regularly.
Yeah, I was just reading that this morning. The writer was talking about the beginning point of humility, and the Old Testament ties this. So there's a trajectory of humility through the Scripture, but he says the Old Testament ties humility to the willingness to be obedient to God's rule, and that's the starting point for humility. Sure. And then from there, it can launch out to humility toward others and humility toward. But at any rate, the starting point has to be a willingness to prostrate yourself and say, "Yeah, sure. I'm broken. You've got the answers, and I want to obey you." And that, without that, it's going to be hard to be humble.
Agreed.
Not my thoughts, but I thought I'd share them.
Let's hop into the second one. We need to move along quickly. Sincerity. We're not going to read the passages that were in your lesson book, but there was passages there that had the idea of being sincere. Quickly, what does anybody think that the word sincere means? What does the word sincere mean? What? Genuine? Okay. Real, maybe. Not a hypocrite. The word ties the idea of technically being free of disguise, is the idea of sincerity. How does that help us listen? How does sincerity help us listen? Anybody? Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good. Genuine.
Yeah, if I'm sincere, I'm not forcing my thoughts into the pool of meaning. I want their thoughts. I genuinely want to hear their thoughts. And I don't want to exclude anybody else. I think sincerity has really summed up the idea of it in that Philippians 2, 3, and 4 passage where I put others' interest ahead of my own. And I think that's the idea of sincerity here in the application. So when somebody else is pouring in their bucket to the pool of meaning, I'm going to listen intently and carefully because I want to hear what they say. I sincerely and genuinely value their input to the pool. And that's the idea. Then the third thing here, Scott. would
It's
be-
patience, and we could look at several scriptures in 1 Corinthians or 1 Thessalonians 5 as well, 2 Timothy 2, but we see patience here, and we see that once again tying in, if you read those, tying into unity passages. Ephesians 4 and 2, Colossians 3, 12 and 13. So what does patience mean? Long suffering, okay. You just got to take it and listen, because some people can't get to the point. Okay?
I don't know that sounds like you're very patient.
You gotta be patient, you gotta expect it.
Stacy, you need to keep working on it.
Yeah.
All right. So, I hear you, brother. I understand.
Yeah, give it to me now.
So, patience, associated with words like mild, forbearing, long-suffering, I would say, as well, right? Okay. The idea is that I'm slow to retaliate or punish, okay, in this sense. Patience. 2 Timothy 2:24, patience when wronged. That's very difficult. Very difficult. So we're quick to do the opposite. Culture trains us that way, strike back. That's typically what our culture shows us. Jesus shows us the better way. Love causes me to want what is best for others, right? I should not let their bad behavior provoke me to respond with bad behavior. And so how does this help us listen? How does that help us listen? We know that people will behave badly, right? That's why we handle conversations poorly, all right? We try to open the floor for others to dump in their bucket. Sometimes it's hard to hear. What do we mean?
A lot of times it's because they're critical of me.
Yeah.
Because the conversation, what makes it crucial is we're on opposite ends.
Yep.
So a lot of times they're going to be critical of me, and I've got to, for me, that's harder than somebody who talks a long time, is to sit there and take the personal attack.
Right.
And be patient and let them do that.
And what do we do when the feedback is ugly? What we should do in listening well is we exercise patience. That's what we should do. We don't get pulled in an emotional reaction. We don't retaliate, and we suffer long. Okay? These are the things. You also suggest instead of responding with anger, we respond with curiosity. Okay? And remember that if someone is responding to me with violence or silence, they don't feel safe. So be curious. What's going on? Find the reason. Find the reason.
All right.
Had to move that fast. Sorry.
Yeah, because we only got about 12 minutes to get through the case study, and the last thing incorporates that. So I'll read that. We'll have a few answers, and then we'll try to make some points from it. While paying the monthly bills, Brad discovers a $250 charge from Dillard's. When he asked Shelley about it, she explains this was for the dress she bought for her brother's wedding. When Brad complained about the price, she reminded him that he encouraged her to get something nice. When he made a snarky comment about not meaning $250 nice, Shelley went silent. For several days, things were kind of cool around the house. Eventually, Brad grew tired of it and confronted Shelley. He insisted that they needed to talk. He reminded her that they had both agreed to be more sensitive to the budget, and the dress seemed extravagant. Through it all, Shelley sat with her arms folded and said nothing. When Brad finished, she asked if he had any more to say because she had other things to do. What's going on with Shelley? What? He's mad.
There you go.
Avoidance or silence? She's chosen.
Shelley didn't explain what type of great deal she got on the dress.
She didn't lead out with the sell.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
That's one way.
Except if you can't make the house payment next month. How can Brad encourage her to talk to him? Oh, yeah, yeah. Unmarried couples do not go to Clemens for marriage counseling. Oh, man. I mean, I understand what you're saying, and is Brad out of line?
That wasn't the answer he was looking for.
Yeah. Right? Never confront your wife.
Not like that. There you go. That's true. That's true.
I think one of the things to keep in mind is that you can have this conversation in a better way.
Yeah.
That's the key. I mean, for all the laughing, my question was, how did Brad already not know about the dress? Because first thing my wife does when she walks in and goes, do you want to see what I bought? And the first question I ask is, well, how much did that cost me, right? So I'm wondering where Brad was when she came home from the store, personally. But let's talk about some ways, and that's what we want to end with, is some ways that we could actually maneuver this better and talk about this. And so you had this on the last page of the lesson. And what this is these are just ways to help people engage and share their story with you in a way that, because here's the thing, we may not like the word confront, but this is a confrontational subject. She bought a $250 dress. It's, in Brad's opinion, over budget, and there seems to be budgetary concerns. And so this is a conversation that probably needs to be had. By the way, if we replace this with football tickets, we probably wouldn't have the same response. Right? Because if she saw he spent $250 on football tickets without talking to her, and he said, well, I told you I was going to the game with my friends, we probably wouldn't say, well, what's she doing? Like, why did he go buy tickets? I mean, I get the joking, but these conversations have to happen in marriages when things like this happen. So the first thing is,
You gotta ask.
just ask.
Simply ask.
Just simply ask. So in this case, Brad could just be like,
Sincere.
hey, I saw you got the dress. You haven't seen it. Can I see the dress? You know, and he could have opened it that way and talked about it that way rather than, you know, we could have said, hey, you know, I saw it cost $250. What happened? You know, not upset, but, you know, and you can have that. By the way, you've got to be able to have those conversations as a couple. If you can't have those conversations as a couple, you don't have a good relationship. Because the thing is, you can't walk around in fear of conversations like that. You got to be able to have them. If you can't have a conversation over spending $250 on a dress, then you're not going to be able to have conversations about disciplining children, about dealing with your in-laws, about anything else, because you can't communicate well. They should have had that conversation. And then we could say that they should have talked about it the day that she got it. There's a whole lot of things there. But just ask. Ask for the response. And a lot of times that's all you have to do. Okay?
It's the way it's asked.
As my wife tells me sometimes, here's my big thing is, she says it's not what I said, it's how I said it. Right?
If he had started off with, honey, you're going to be the prettiest woman there no matter what you wear.
There you go.
You know, ease into it a little bit.
You know, it's funny you said that because Sunday morning in my class, the son of a doctor that goes to church here was really consumed because the subject was not lying with the Ten Commandments. With if your wife asks you, and it was the older son, by the way, if you want to. He asked at least 5 times, if your wife says, does this dress make me look fat, what do you say?
Absolutely not.
And I said, what I say is, I love the way that dress looks on you. Because I'm not going to lie. I'm just going to tell her I like the way the dress looks on her.
That ain't going to work no more. You done laid it out there.
My wife learned a long time ago not to ask me that question. So at the end of the day, I mean, you have to yeah, there's ways to answer and deal with things in the right way, you know. Secondly, I went for you instead of
You
for me.
did.
We'll
That's
just-
okay. Go ahead.
Okay.
You do, Mary.
Mirror is, this is when she says things are fine, but they're clearly not, right? So then what you want to do is you want to mirror that. I can imagine Shelley saying, why do we need to talk about this? I've already heard everything you have to say the last time we talked about it, right? You've already said everything. So when you get to that point, mirroring looks like this, saying, well, I hear you say that you're fine, but I can also tell that you're not okay and we're not okay. So we need to figure this out, like in a good, positive way. Tone is crucial there, by the way. It cannot be attacking or harsh. It needs to be sincere and with humility. And say, hey, what's more, and at this point, by the way, something that Brad could say is, what's more important than what you spill in this dress is that we're good. That we figure this out. Right? Third.
Paraphrase. So it's a tool to keep dialogue going. Simply repeat back to others what you hear them saying. Now, let's be smart about that. This helps us. This helps ensure you hear what they're trying to say. Okay? Imagine if Shelley says, I'm tired of you being a tightwad. I feel guilty every time I spend money on myself. What's the important information here? Okay? She feels uncomfortable spending money on herself. The unimportant information is that Brad is a tightwad. Paraphrasing can help the other guy think about how they really feel when it's repeated back.
So you would repeat that back by saying, so what I'm hearing is
That
you're uncomfortable
uncomfortable.
spending money on yourself.
Right.
And then that can spring into a conversation where we can talk about why that is.
Yes.
The tightwad is a personal attack, and that's unnecessary, right? The last one is to prime, and this just means sometimes you kind of have to prime the conversation. So if she's just not willing to talk at the end of all this, Brad may say something like, well, I wonder if you feel like your brother's wedding was unimportant to me, or that I don't want you to have nice things. That's not the case. I just know we're tight, and I'm worried about money. We've had that conversation. I mean, because at the end of the day, let me make sure I understand something, that if, and there's nothing in here that shows that this budgetary concern is false, right? So money is one of the top 3 things that causes problems in marriages. Communication is part of it. And that's why you got to have these kind of conversations in your marriage. Because, and this is a unique case, and they should have, if there was concerns, he should have said, hey, let's talk before you go how much you're going to spend. He might have said, hey, I would like for you to keep it under this amount. And if they had that conversation, then when she comes home, what do you think she's going to do if they've had that conversation beforehand? She's going to share what she got. She's going to say, hey, I know we don't want to spend over $200, but there was just nothing appropriate, and I had to spend a little bit more, right?
Yeah, it wasn't modest enough, so I had to spend more.
Yeah,
That's a good one.
yeah, that's a good one. But that communication, all of that is preventative, by the way. That could have prevented the crucial conversation. But the point is, in a marriage, in a church, at work,
Family.
any relationship, these conversations are going to come up. They're unavoidable. Because we're not always going to be perfect about doing the work beforehand to prevent the problem. We're human. And so what we have to do is realize that when there is these issues, we've got to have a productive conversation with dialogue. And what's missing in this conversation is Brad does come off as accusatory. His tone is wrong. He starts off with violence in a way, which causes her to respond in silence. He's not actually trying to get her to share her part of the story. And that is his fault. So he has to figure out a way to have the discussion that makes her feel safe. We've talked about that a lot. Mm-hmm. The reason why she's got her arms folded and not saying anything is she doesn't feel safe to talk because of how he's handled the conversation. Yeah. Now, he could stop right then and go, listen, I've handled this wrong. I know that obviously you feel attacked. You feel unsafe? Let's start over. Tell me about the dress. And start over completely. But again, the conversations have to happen. That's the main thing you got to realize. That's why we're having the class. It's because we've got to learn how to communicate through these really difficult subjects, not just ignore each other or create our own stories and build up this animosity. By the way, I've seen that in marriages, because Duane and I have had to work with people that have done this. I tell you where I see it a lot is at churches. I see it a lot at churches where members tell themselves a story about the preacher or the elders or the Bible class teacher. They don't talk to anybody about it. They carry it with them until they get so mad that nothing's been resolved, even though they've not had a conversation about it. And then all of a sudden, next thing you know is they're moving to another congregation because they've not had a productive conversation about the issue.
Sure.
And they've not sat down and allowed everybody to pour their bucket in. So that's why that's important, and that's why this class hopefully has been helpful. We're out of time. Thank you for your comments tonight.